Hello, and welcome one and all to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Okay, Phil, when I leave the pause, you that's great. Slightly late, but really, really good. And one of us, at the very least, is very pleased to be joined by a special guest analyst this week, FightSite.com's Dan Albert. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here.
We are very happy to have you. Thank you for making it a problem for me not to have you on the show. That's the way. There's a guy in the YouTube comments, he's going to be delighted when I mention this without even knowing his name, who's made it his mission to reply to every single episode of Heavy Hands, I guess forever. And he just keeps track of, how many straight YouTube episodes he has commented on. And I did tell him a couple weeks ago that if he makes it to 100 in a row, he can replace Phil. So that's that's the kind of sort of the persistence you need sometimes to get on this platform. And Dan, you showed that persistence, and we're very happy to have you here.
I, once again, am honored to be here, and I hope I didn't come across as overbearing or annoying in the process.
Even people who have this as their only introduction to your personality, these few words you've said, I don't think anybody would accuse you of being an overbearing personality, Dan.
Just wait till they hear me talk.
That's right. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. Really just two fights that stand head and shoulders above the rest, but a lot contained within them. UFC 280 was perhaps not quite as good as we were hoping. Certainly the prelims sort of failed to deliver for quite a long stretch, except for the light heavyweight instant classic between Volkan Oezdemir and Nikita Krylov. But when it got to the main card, I would say UFC 280 more than made up for what it lacked in unpredictability and action with pure, unadulterated weirdness. This was a very strange night of fights. And I think that includes even the main event, which was one of the least weird fights on the entire main card. Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev for the vacant lightweight belt. Vacant no more. Hey, I finally called a Dagestani fighter correctly. Phil, are you proud of me?
Picking him to win, yes.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Only we can lay accusations of both Russophobia and Islamophobia, if not at least to rest.
Yeah.
And we can give you a mark in the column, 4 column.
I'm very proud of myself. Dan, what was your prediction for this fight?
So going into this, I think one of the issues I had picking Makhachev from the beginning was I thought to myself that I hadn't really seen too much from him as far as like when someone would take the initiative away from him. Mm-hmm. I had seen a lot of like good waiting game kind of tactics from him. He was very patient in the clinch as far as turning guys. That was his bread and butter. Like that's what he was really good at. Mm-hmm. So I was very interested to see how that would happen if it went there. But I thought Oliveira's kind of transitions, forward pressure, especially behind the kicks and like lead hand into other offense would kind of push him back consistently. Makhachev surprised me, though, because he gave a lot more looks than I'm used to seeing from him. But how he used those looks were probably the most surprising thing. So I think everyone kind of knew this fight was going to probably look pretty much nearly one-way traffic. But interestingly, it wasn't always one-way traffic, but it kind of ended up being Makhachev's fight the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah, I got into an extremely contentious argument with this guy on Twitter, BJJ Oversimplified.
Oh,
I was like, who is this asshole? I don't remember. I don't remember following this guy. This guy.
His name's Ken Bone or something.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Turns out it was a friend of the show, Ben Cohn. It did take me a moment after that. You're like, oh, I love Ben, of course. I didn't recognize his new handle. And he and I he disagreed about the way the fight might play out. Thought we had a pretty interesting discussion about whether this was a fight that would force Makhachev to fight against type. That was kind of his contention. Mm-hmm. And it sort of was, that Makhachev didn't get to pressure easily. He did have to engage more on the feet. He had to use his reactive takedowns a little more proactively than he likes to in most fights. But I countered that by saying that maybe this is a fight where Charles is going to feel he has to fight against type 2, because how much of his typical completely confident pressuring style is based on the idea that people aren't going to want to grapple with him. And is this not the first fight in a long time where even Dubronx must be coming in thinking, maybe I shouldn't get taken down by this guy? And I do think that psychology sort of did affect Charles's performance much more than Islam's. Islam looked really prepared to meet the pressure. I mean, the very first strike that landed of the fight was Makhachev just running Charles into a straight left hand and staggering him. And on the fight went, and Makhachev was far more comfortable countering Charles on the way in than I think Charles was in actually forcing the issue with his strikes. He looked more awkward than ever, I assume because he was quite wary of getting tied up and taken down. So, Phil, what did you think? Anything surprise you here?
I mean, looking at it, I think... Okay, so going into this fight, even before we started watching it, after you've recorded the episode or you've written down your analysis, there are always things that jump out at you.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was thinking is that you've really undersold in two fights the potential for two guys to get hurt on the feet. And I think it was Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush. And the Dariush thing didn't come to pass. The Charles Oliveira one kind of did. Mm-hmm. And yeah, because the basic thing is you don't actually need to be a super good striker to hurt either one of them.
Right.
Yeah, that was one part of it. So when he got hurt fairly quickly, and when Makhachev started landing on him, I was like, oh yes, we should have mentioned this more. He's not difficult. He's really not difficult to get to, despite the fact that the grappling is going to be a big, is obviously a big safety edge for Makhachev that people like Gaethje obviously didn't have access to. Mm-hmm. Other things, found myself thinking we've been sort of thinking about how Makhachev can get forced into forced outside of his comfort zone by pressure and aggression. It was sort of the case I was trying to make when we were discussing the fight. That we've never seen him without being able to just hit his own pace.
Right.
Then I thought again he's been trained by Khabib, which means that A, he probably has a very good game plan coming in. B, that Khabib is insanely scary person to train with, I would imagine.
Did you see his reaction to Bilal Muhammad shouting out how much scarier he was as a heavyweight? Like a little joke, a little jab at him putting on weight. Khabib, not a twinkle in his eye, not a trace of a smile.
Absolutely stone-faced. It's Abdulmanap would not stand for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, he's presumably very good at putting on a ton of pressure on when you fight with him.
Yeah.
So, else, and yeah, the fact that those things kind of, I think, coalesced together into making Makhachev's performance just a lot more comfortable than you might otherwise think.
Yeah.
And I saw Dan Tom on Twitter actually had a really good call in that he said that Oliveira always goes for guillotines on the same side that Makhachev shoots on. And I was like, oh, that is super interesting. Obviously, Makhachev did not shoot at all in this fight.
Yeah, I myself was expecting more reactive shots. He took a cue from a reverse cue from Khabib when Khabib fought Gaethje. Because we were like, Khabib doesn't shoot. He never gets people down with the shots. They just lead to clinches where he then works them. He shot like a demon on Gaethje and took him down cleanly on more than one occasion. This was a fight where Islam, who of course has really just as diverse, less horsepower, but just as diverse a takedown game as Khabib, he just leaned on his clinch takedowns. And he's got more than enough of those for those to work when he needs them to.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things is that we might have to think about for this, like, for that camp, is that there's few fighters, as we've mentioned before, but the list is growing, where you can look at them and say, this is what you should do in this fight, and then, but there's always the caveat in MMA, which is that you won't do it. But this might be one of those camps where you have to be like, they might actually just,
they do it,
fight against type and do what is necessary for every fight, because this is there was 0 shots. The first takedown was weird, but I don't really know what happened. It looked like Charles pulled guard. The second was just a trip from the clinch, and like you said, Islam was completely fine with following Charles down to the ground when he had him hurt.
Yeah.
It all just added up to what was basically just domination, and which was something that honestly I just didn't expect.
I think there was a clash of heads in that first quote unquote takedown.
Yeah, I think there was, but it also looked like one of those ones which was way worse for Islam than it was for Charles.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say with those, but I mean, what did you see there, Dan? It was a weird sequence, the first takedown.
So I'm not too sure what happened there. I was paying attention to some other things on rewatch. So kind of how a lot of the takedowns happened. The first one, kind of what happens is, and this is kind of something I kind of read about Oliveira going in. So Oliveira is tremendous as far as like offensively, like pushing for the finish. He's probably the best finisher the sport has. But one of Oliveira's things is his best defense is kind of his best offense, where he can especially work the transitions.
Right.
So going in, one question I seriously had, and I'm not trying to divert this too much. I'm making a point. So I was very interested to see how the clinch battle would look here, because Oliveira likes to break posture by putting those double collar ties around the head and then like creating knees right there, because he'll break your posture and kind of force you down. Makhachev does something different. Makhachev likes to get very close and like turn you with his feet. It's less so where his grips are and more so what he's doing with his feet. So you'll see him. Sarukian's a really good fight point to where he does this. He constantly is shifting direction and like maybe angling his body to the side a little bit. And then he'll eventually turn you in such a way that your posture breaks, and then he'll trip you or do something to make you just fall over. So the first one, Oliveira, is kind of a mix of those two things, where Oliveira kind of decides, I'm going to go for my body lock takedown. And to be fair to Oliveira, this usually works because he's ridiculously strong himself. But he's kind of at a point where his posture is already broken because he's kind of falling backwards, and Islam's kind of pushed him to the side. So Makhachev is up on top. And so the other one is a little more interesting, though, because I think Oliveira made some strategic errors in this fight, because when he got Makhachev to the fence, he was doing some good job with the collar tie knees. The problem is he just stayed there so long that Makhachev's like, okay, I can just kind of turn you and then trip you now, because you're right here. And so those kind of things just compounded together in those wrestling exchanges to kind of let Islam keep getting him there. As for the ground game itself, I'm not a grappler person. I'm not going to pretend I am.
Oh, thank
But
God.
I do think it was a little surprising how well Oliveira was able to fend him off that well. But I also think that's kind of exemplative, as well as kind of differences between Makhachev and Nurmagomedov on top.
Yeah, I appreciated, just back to the fence, the clinch takedowns against the fence for a moment. I appreciated this. This is just another great example of the kind of, not just the like layered takedown threat that Makhachev and, Khabib as well, and many other of this like modern sort of type of wrestle grappler. Not just the layers though, but the opportunism in those positions. Like the first real takedown Makhachev hit was that I'm just going to use DC's wrestling terminology and call it a whizzer kick because it sounds cooler than whatever the, whichever of the 8 possible judo throws that might have been. And he set that up. A lot of times that takedown fails because the fighter trying to hit the throw fails to control the opposite hand. That is a very common reason for that to fail. Like sometimes it works anyway. Like Tim Boach's famous redneck judo throw was the same kind of technique. That's a completely one-handed, like full horsepower throw that he hits, but it's awesome because he's so strong and yada yada. But usually what happens is somebody fails to control the other hand, and so the fighter can post on the way down, and then it turns out that even though you still have your strong wizard, they still have their underhook, and they fight back to a neutral position. He looked for that takedown when Charles was controlling his own wrist. He used Charles's desire to fight for wrist control to fight off the double underhooks and the leg attacks to find the opportunity for that takedown. And then in round 2, when they had a similar sequence, Charles was controlling his wrist again. Islam had the underhook this time. He threatened, I think, an inside trip, sort of like the opposite direction of the same idea. And Charles had to fight away from it frantically, and Islam used that to get to double underhooks. And then he just very patiently cooked Charles with the double underhooks up against the fence until an easy takedown presented itself. So I did think that this fight was a real demonstration of Islam's unique version of this style of wrestling. That he's got all the layers and stuff like fighters like Ronda Rousey and Khabib Nurmagomedov have, but he lacks, the power and the raw creativity of, say, Khabib. But he's very patient and very methodical, and there is always another idea to follow up one that doesn't work. And I just don't... Who else has Charles fought that even has that approach, not to mention actually wants to take him down? It worked beautifully. Very, very little trouble for him in the clinch overall, which was an area that there was reason to worry about here.
Yeah. One thing I think worth pointing out about is Makhachev did improve with some of his mechanics. He's always been a decent mechanical striker. Mm-hmm. Sometimes he's kind of been guilty of kind of just watching his work, which is why I think his decision to immediately hit Charles as hard as he could at the very start was a great idea. Because it's like, if you're going to have someone who's coming at you that hard, you need to hit them, make them back off. Because at the very least, you get their attention by recognizing, oh, okay, you're not just going to wilt.
Right.
And I do think this was a pretty impressive performance from Makhachev, all things considering.
Absolutely. Yeah, his counterpunching was on point. I mean, it was basic. You certainly still saw some of his technical flaws whenever he tried to pursue Charles with strikes. Like, immediately after that first left hand, he tries to throw 4 strikes in a row off the front foot. And it's like once you get past the 1-2 territory, as is often the case, you're like, oh, he's not technical at all. This looks like the guy who got knocked out by Adriano Martins. Mm-hmm. But as long as he was on the back foot, bringing Charles into him and waiting for Charles to cross that cross into the danger zone first and restricting himself to short little combinations, his distance and timing were on point.
Yeah. That was honestly a genuine surprise that he was going to be that effective as a counterpuncher. Because, we knew he was an accurate straight puncher.
Yeah.
I guess we knew he could hit with power. I mean, the T-Bow knockout is not... T-Bow's very old, but...
Yeah. It's something.
I don't think he'd synthesized them in that kind of way before. And it's not like, Charles is difficult to hit either. But, I thought he looked genuinely, potent and threatening in that position. And, he didn't need to be particularly... if the fight had lasted longer, potentially that kind of barreling forwards might have gotten him into trouble. Mm-hmm. I think you could argue that the fight was looking a little less controlled at the point at which he summarily finished it. Mm-hmm. But it was just just a really impressive performance. I mean, he really has been showing exactly what you want to see from a fighter coming into their prime as an elite.
Absolutely.
Which is that he's been going up in competition and looking better against the better fighters.
Yeah.
Like, his last sort of pedestrian fight was against Moises, and he's still like how many fights has he finished in a row now?
Good question.
5?
Can it possibly be 5?
It's quite a lot. I mean, that is, I think, the
it
ideal.
is 5. Holy shit.
It's that's a 5-fight finish streak. I mean, that is really what you want to see. And as I said, like, tactical, strategic adjustments for the fighters in front of him, none of those fights looked the same. Like, it's damn impressive stuff.
Makhachev has finished the majority, by a good margin, of all his UFC fights. But they've been coming quicker lately. Yeah. Like, he's just been crushing people. Yeah, I mean, I had the same thought. As soon as the fight was over, I was like, if Islam's going to fight like this, I'm well on my way to being a fan of the guy. Very, very impressive stuff. Really understanding, like, the strategic, like, pinch points of this matchup and molding the things he already does well to fit them. Yeah, I thought he looked phenomenal. That last combination he threw that dropped Charles, I mean, not to mention how smooth the follow-up into the arm triangle was. He was on it instantly as soon as he went to the ground.
And just the terrifying squeeze that he
Oh, my God.
have.
But just the combination, like, you can see Charles is trying to pressure. He's trying to get his way back into the fight. He presses forward. He gets a somewhat ugly combination out of Islam first. Throws a right hand. Charles' striking is not looking great either. He has all the telltale signs of a guy who is wary now of being taken down. Overthrows on a right hand. And Islam, ducks it. And I wouldn't even call it a slip. He takes his eyes off his opponent. He does a big over-exaggerated duck. And then he swings back as hard as he can. I still think this is a good gamble. Like, he is trying to make sure, as Dan said at the top, that Charles knows you're not going to run me over in the striking. There's going to be heat coming back at you. But then Charles...
what's going to happen? Is Charles Oliveira's head not going to be there?
Exactly. And Charles continues to press, and he's like, okay, I've just gathered information. He's going to duck. I'm going to walk in and just sort of try a knee. And you can look at it in slow motion, and Islam's eyes are so completely focused on Charles coming toward him. He is looking at the man's chin, just waiting for it to get close enough to fire. And then a, honestly, really crisp 2-3 counter the moment Charles steps in to that distance. And the left hand doesn't quite land, but the fact that he made it a combination, the right hand obliterates Charles and very quickly leads to a finish. He was really quick on the trigger, really confident with his striking, and didn't push his luck too much when it came to like overextending himself or having to get into long exchanges. That's another thing too. Dan, you mentioned that he can have a tendency to watch his work. I thought he was very astute at changing his position, changing his distance, changing his angle. The moment that he had finished an exchange, almost every single time, he was like really aware of the need to reset and just rinse and repeat, make Charles walk into counters all over again. It was just, a near perfect performance from Islam Makhachev.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't disagree. It was a very good performance, and it definitely validated a lot of criticisms, I'd say. It doesn't validate, quote, all of them, because he's, like Khabib, not perfect himself, but it proves that you're going to need to have a good fighter to beat him, frankly.
Yeah.
That's just it.
Well, who do you think? Any top picks? Who are the tough tests in the division right now for Makhachev?
I'm not as familiar on lightweight scene currently. I know some people have told me like Demiris Magulov will be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I know some think I know some have said the likes of Gamrot or Dariush potentially. Mm-hmm. I don't personally know. I'm going to need to watch more footage before I come to my own conclusions. But I think just with some of the poise and patience and game planning Islam showed here, proves you just can't approach him without like some measure of like tact.
Yeah. Phil, any top picks for you?
No, I don't think anyone can beat him. Not reliably, not in the light, not no one that I would pick to beat him. I think. I think there's people who can give him tough fights. I think Tsarukian and Gamrot and people like that who can just, physically survive the grappling and hang on the feet with him can give him tough fights. But he's mostly I think he's a better striker than them at the moment, and probably still just more effectively able to dictate the wrestling. I think he out-wrestles all of the old guys and just crushes them from top position. Maybe Chandler could like lamp him. But you can just say that about anyone Chandler fights. You can just be like, oh yeah, maybe he'll just deck him instantly. But I just don't think there's anyone I'd pick over him in the lightweight division. I am genuinely interested if he does fight Volkanovski and what that looks like. There's two basic dynamics to balance there, which is that firstly it's Volkanovski, not the world's biggest 45er, going up to fight a giant grappler.
Yeah.
It's also the fact that Volkanovski is, and we'll get to this later on when we talk about Peter Yan, best small man fighter, the best small man fighter against big men that we've ever seen in the UFC by a real significant margin.
Yeah.
He would be blisteringly fast.
A guy who routinely makes big guys look like they have the reach disadvantage. His mastery of distance. Yeah, I'm spiritually opposed to that matchup. I'd much rather see Volk continue to defend his belt. I'd much rather see Islam take on some challengers. I'm really curious to see Dariush versus Islam. I think could be quite competitive.
I mean, but to be honest, I'm fine with.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is am I really going to complain about?
It's not one of those ones where there's a list of. I mean, do I really care about seeing Volkanovski fight the winner of Keita and Allen?
Yeah, right.
And whoever's next in line for him.
Am I going to complain about?
Do I seriously think there are any? Do I really think that Dariush can actually beat Islam? Don't really. I've got to be honest.
I'm not going to call it one way or the other, but I'm curious about that one. I'm not 100% sure that it's an easy matchup for Islam. But yeah, am I going to complain about seeing two of the best prepared game planners, well-rounded fighters? No. Volkanovski's earned a little step up if he wants it at this point. He's in the conversation to being the best fighter we've ever seen. So, why not? Okay, let's take
if he loses, whatever. You're just it was a giant grappler, and he'd never fought that weight class before.
Exactly.
Fine, go back to dominating the weight.
And he really might not lose, because he's very, very good. And he will come in with an approach tailor-made to give Islam as much trouble as possible. Okay, well, let's take a break. We've only got Dan for possibly one segment more. Look at the kind of length this show is turning into lately. So when we come back, we are going to talk about everyone's favorite fight of the card. People unanimously pleased with every aspect of this contest. Sean O'Malley, Piotr Yan, after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are skipping over Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw for now. Not that there isn't anything to say about it. There certainly is, but the dynamic was far, far more straightforward than any of us could have guessed, for reasons really having nothing to do with the style matchup at hand. Instead, Dan has specifically requested that we move on to Sean O'Malley versus Piotr Yan because, as he tells us, he has the one true scorecard for this fight. Dan, lay it on us.
Oh shit! I wasn't ready for that. Truth be told, I scored it live, Jan, but I didn't rescore it. And to be honest, I kind of don't really think talking about the scorecards is what I want to do.
No, fair enough.
Because I think what's more important is talking about actually like what O'Malley did to trouble Jan, but also like talking about Jan himself.
Yeah.
Because Jan, for those who follow me, you know Jan is a pretty big pet project of mine. I've written pretty extensively about how I think he works as a fighter, and I can give the short version of that as I go. But I think pre-fight, I speak for everyone, or mostly everyone, in that saying that O'Malley, we thought had a few things to offer here, but we thought he lacked a lot of depth to really get them done.
Right.
But I think it goes without saying he stepped it up really, really big time here.
Yeah. A lot of people were saying, is Petr Yan washed? Is he on a decline? What's going on? Ben asked me, do you think he's on the puncher's path? Is he becoming obsessed with his power? And I was like, yeah, he's fought worse fights than this quite a while ago. I thought he looked worse than this overall than he did against Jimmy Rivera. I think what really happened here is that, frankly, we were all wrong about what a tough style test Sean O'Malley was for him. We just failed to appreciate that.
I think, if I may, so kind of who O'Malley was. O'Malley's always been this pot shutter or sniper at distance.
Yeah.
He's all about distraction, setup, and execution. I think one thing going in is people underestimated just how hard O'Malley hits.
Yeah.
And that part didn't surprise me, but it did surprise me that he was able to work or find some ways creatively around Jan's guard, though in retrospect, he really, really did a good job of exploiting some of the little things. So there's one thing in particular he did, and this is it took me on my rewatch to catch this, but it's also because I watch a shit ton of boxing.
Yeah.
But what he did was he realized in the close stance that if I jab Jan's rear hand, I can kind of draw his hand up to kind of distract him. And then I can force him to reset with that and then take a slight angle and then fire over the top with it. Because his rear hand's away, his lead hand's pairing out. That gives me a straight down the center avenue to catch him. And and to do that, he had to kind of center up with his jab a lot. As in, I've never seen O'Malley work the jab that much or kind of creatively use it to create little things. And I think I think that's the most impressive thing here is that he's always been a good feinter, and you can always draw Jan's kind of defensive reactions with those, but you still have to work really, really hard to get around them or make them count. And he was doing lots of little level change feints with those just to draw Jan's trademark dip behind the high guard. But he was also taking a step at the same time as he was jabbing, and then he would do that little move that matters.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing O'Malley did that was very, very impressive here. Because it did take him a little bit to kind of figure out what he was doing. I don't think O'Malley looked flawless or anything. He still showed a lot of the same issues. The biggest of all being his resets off of every time he throws is the big problem. But I do think he kind of proved a lot of us wrong with how deep his kind of skill that kind of goes, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's essentially I'm sure that Phil and I weren't the only ones making comparisons to Corey Sandhagen as an opponent, and just sort of failing to appreciate what if Corey Sandhagen was faster and hit way harder? Does it work to walk up on a guy, ignore his jabs, essentially, try to bounce things off your guard, and then just wait for the big thing that you can key in on? First of all, I think O'Malley is kind of a specialist at usually with feints, but even in some recent fights, using the jab the way he has here to kind of draw out little patterns in his opponent's defense, and then to exploit that. It's a thing that, say, Vladimir Klitschko was always really good at doing, using this annoying, pawing, peppering jab, making you slip or pull your head back or whatever, and then just lining you up for one single devastating punch. And that's just not an element of Corey Sandhagen's game. For all the trouble that Corey Sandhagen did give Jan with his size, and for all that he did make him work really hard to adjust, he didn't have that element to just say, all right, I'm going to make you worry about all this bullshit with your defense and then just try to end your life with a single punch. Accurate, fast, and powerful. Yeah, I thought O'Malley, like, as good as Jan usually is at sort of seeing past all the noise and waiting for that big moment to counter, O'Malley was just as good at putting a ton of noise out there and waiting for the big moment to actually step in and initiate an exchange. Really, really sharp and accurate. Phil, what do you say?
I mean, I think this is one of those performances where I think it's simultaneously super impressive from the guy that we expected to get torched.
Yeah.
And simultaneously one of those ones where I won't blink an eye if he turns out to basically be the same guy afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that there's no actual... because I'm thinking of fights like Kelvin Gastelum versus Israel Adesanya, and Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker, because all three of these fights had exactly the same narrative behind them, which is that this guy is a casual's favorite, he is mostly a hype job, the guy he is up against has tremendous depth, is much better than him, and is just going to crush him. And, you know, I'm not saying anything sarcastic about the fools who thought this, because I was 100% in line with all of those takes.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Not quite to the extent, you know, that we try to be objective about Sean O'Malley, and he is actually quite a good fighter, but, you know, we were still like, he's going to get destroyed.
Yeah.
He super overperformed, but then again, you know, I think all the flaws that have been pointed out are still there. If he goes on to, like, lose to Aljamain Sterling and then rack up a similarly Till Gastelum-esque kind of run where he uses to, like, Irab, Ricky Simone, and then, like, Adrian Yanez, I'm going to be completely
unsurprised. More than any vast improvement, I really think that just failed to consider how tough O'Malley's style might be for Petr Yan specifically.
Yeah. I mean, really, it was just... I mean, yeah, it was just the fact that Sante was able to do work on Jan by setting it up with his jab and, like, bringing the guard up. And he had to, like, bring in a big shot was often something that that Jan could still parry and deal with. Mm-hmm. Like, mostly Sandhagen is building up to he uses, like, his straight shots to build into hooks or whatever, and Jan was blocking the harder shots that Sandhagen was throwing at him,
and also just eating some of them. You know, and that is harder to do. Using your chin as a failsafe is harder against O'Malley. He's just a meaner puncher.
He's just a bigger puncher and just a straighter puncher. He was just punching right down the middle of Jan's guard.
If I can go ahead and just so I might see Jan very, very differently than most people as far as, like, talking about him altogether, but if I may, because I do have a point to make,
please,
kind of why I think O'Malley and by extension Aljo did so well in these last two fights. So I do think how I see Jan as a fighter is he's kind of known as a builder, but he's more about building his effectiveness around punishing what his opponents do and takes away their own initiative. He's excellent, if not the absolute best, at, like, picking up on their little successes and then turning them around on them.
Right.
And combined with being an enormous transitional threat and arguably the best, if not, I would actually personally say the best, at, like, having an active defensive guard, he's very, very difficult to, like, get to and stop from that department. But there's always been one kind of core issue that I've suspected with Jan, and I kind of think these last two fights have sort of confirmed it for me. And I think it's that his game is very, very much tied to what his opponents are doing consistently. Like, because he's zeroing so much on what they're doing, he sometimes lets his own kind of initiative go away in the process.
Yeah.
Like, he's extremely great at it. He's great at controlling them. He's fantastic at cutting them off. off in doing things, but he's always been someone who doesn't do like little things to keep his initiative going. Like
Right.
Connor, I think you and I had a conversation the other day. Like lack of rangefinders is one thing. Like keeping his reacting to their jabs in kind of unorthodox ways is another thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you factor that with like the other little things, because fighters always have these little habits that guys can exploit. Jan kind of gives a little bit of margins for guys to work with, and if you're a fighter who can have the attribute or ability to take advantage of that margin, you can exploit that well. So like Ojo in this whole division is the best at exploiting margins to like get to that one area, his back control.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for O'Malley, that margin's as simple as he hits fuck off hard basically, and it's just always like there's always been little subtle things Jan does that kind of just allows some guys with that attribute to kind of get in there. So it's like you can draw his guard with a lot of feints. He is very active at being defensively sound with it, but the fact of the matter is you can still do it. Like, even Aljo, who for all intents and purposes is not a hard hitter, like, figured out time and time and again, I can make you react by just throwing something, and then I can get space back.
Right.
And it's because of that Jan concedes space himself, he shells up, that gives guys opportunities to work, and it's just that's always been one of his major issues, and if not his biggest issue, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a huge danger in letting a much bigger opponent, at least in terms of reach and height, just letting them freely bounce rangefinders off your guard. They know exactly where you are. If at any moment you reveal a sort of predictable pattern in your follow-up defense, if they see any opening created by those pestering jabs, they are going to be the first to snap up that opportunity because you have let them touch you. Touching your guard is just as useful as touching your actual face if we're talking about determining range. And I think that was something that O'Malley really, really exploited. And again, that I think I just completely failed to apprehend the idea that literally, the way I see it, one of the major adjustments, the turning points in that Sandhagen fight, was Jan just letting Sandhagen have the jabbing distance. And just waiting for whatever was coming after the jab to then create longer and more unpredictable exchanges where he could chase Sandhagen's resets and oftentimes just have to eat a shot and just outpunch him. And
so I think that's
yeah.
that kind of runs to something that we were talking about in the prediction for the fight, is that we were saying that like Jan will take what you give him.
Yeah,
I think this is true in a fully three-dimensional sense, right?
Correct. Yes.
In that he will take wrestling if you give it to him. He will take low kicks, body punches. A thing, right? But not true in like. I think this gets to what Dan was, I think, very accurately pointing towards. It's not really true in like a scalar sense, because I think Jan wants to punish people for things badly.
Yeah,
doesn't want to, and maybe that is a kind of puncher's path thing to worry about, but that he's not willing to take willing to take small victories.
Yeah,
like if you look at this fight as opposed to like the Pedro Munoz fight for Sean O'Malley. Pedro Munoz fights that fight essentially the understanding
only taking small victories
box with O'Malley, and he just took the crappiest low kicks that he possibly could every single time.
Yeah,
like were they the hardest low kicks in the world? No. Was O'Malley probably even particularly hurt by them? No. Did he win the first round? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But Jan fought, like I said, it's a really three-dimensional fight. He was cutting off with body kicks. He was going for takedowns. But he was not, I think his constant tendency to be like, I can figure out what you're doing, better than you, better. I'm going to know what you're doing better than you are by the end of this fight.
Yeah.
And it meant that he ended up walking into some big moments and got into some serious trouble and lost the fight.
We've praised Jan with good reason many times for his ability to build, to build an attack on an opponent in single exchanges or over the course of a fight, and usually both. it's always a shock when you truly get an example of like the blessing and curse dynamic. That maybe we didn't notice that it can actually be a weakness that psychologically Jan feels that he has to build. Because, yeah, maybe this fight would have been a lot easier if he had just contented himself with all the low kicks he was landing on a regular basis. Were they all the cleanest shots? No. But, you know, O'Malley wasn't liking them, and they were working. And it probably would have yielded greater results over the course of the fight if he had just stuck to those kinds of small victories. But no, he had to, invite the chaos. Yes, Dan.
I think what's kind of weird and where, like, a lot of people are going to differ on talking about this like they did with Aljo too is, like, I don't really know my stance yet, but I do think I'm personally a little confused as to I've seen Jan take little victories to build and create those big moments before that I didn't really see much in this fight. Mm-hmm. Like, I've written about it extensively, like the Sandhagen and first Aljo fights. Like, first Aljo was very important because, to me, that's one of Jan's more impressive performances until we get to the knee, but that's his own fault.
Hey, that's impressive, too. Just a different kind.
That's true.
I've not forgotten it. Yeah. And Jan hasn't forgotten it either. You could see that as a major turning point in his career.
That's true. Where Aljo won, though, really impressed me was, like, his understanding of, like, the little things and understanding why they mattered.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, whenever Aljo isn't coming at me, I'm going to pressure him and hit him to the body, or I'm going to punish his resets. Then he's going to come forward, I'm going to guard everything because I know his main target's going to be kicking me, or trying to get me to the fence, and that's where I need to fight grips. Mm-hmm. Or against Sandhagen, it's like, I touch you with a little step, I cut you off, parry your jab from southpaw because you're worse as an worse as a southpaw jabber. Mm-hmm. But then I'm going to kick you to the body to prevent logger exchanges. Little victories like that, and then I can start pressuring you and throw those fuck-off powerful shots after that.
Right.
This one is where it gets weird, because I can totally understand the threat of, like, O'Malley's power, probably making Jan a little gun-shy, but I did also see him start this fight really strong with, like, resets, and then later on I see him adjusting even to some O'Malley's jabs by coming inside behind the guard, out pivoting him and then smashing him into those, like, body locks. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weird. I don't know if the puncher's path is an interesting kind of idea, I think, because I think it's kind of a variation here on maybe what's going on. Mm-hmm. But it might also just be tied to just who he's fighting as well. So
yeah, I was thinking he may have just thought that O'Malley sucks.
Yeah.
I think. and that he was like, it's just like, this guy, look at this guy.
I mean, I think Phil and I both agreed that he definitely sort of underestimated Sterling in their rematch. Had every reason.
Would agree with that. Yeah, I'd say he underestimated both guys, but
yeah,
I don't know. I don't want to jump to absolutes personally, but I can see it.
Yeah, I think it's not at all unlikely that we are seeing Jan, if not like I don't think he's hit any kind of point of no return, but in a sort of slump where, like, after an incredibly successful career, after just, like, climbing straight to the top of the bantamweight division, beating a variety of different styles and crushing all of them, that now, like, it's just not easy anymore. And I'm willing to think that we're seeing either some overconfidence or, like, compensation of the appearance of overconfidence as he's, like, running into this wall of just, like, consistently bigger and dangerous and well-rounded fighters. But I'm not yet ready to believe that this guy's, like, he can't possibly get back to his winning ways. I think you put him in there with, I don't know, who are they going to match him with next? Like
Beto, probably.
With Cheeto? Are they not going to do Cheeto Sterling? I think they were.
Oh, why would you do that? No one cares about Cheeto Vera. No, they do O'Malley Sterling.
I actually read right before we started talking they're making Aljo Cejudo or something, or they're targeting that. But
great.
Who knows?
That's great.
And they're also making Jones Miocic. Apparently, oh no, they're not.
Whoa, okay.
So
I was getting ready and I was getting into my eating crow mindset because I saw that there was an announcement of a big fight and a lot of people were speculating Jones Miocic.
You know, they did say that they were targeting it for UFC 282, and then and I was like, oh yeah, I will be reading Winds of Winter and playing Star Citizen in the build up to this, and and then immediately they were like, we're hoping to get Jones back in, early 2023.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they're like maybe leaning a little bit into fight announcements that I don't necessarily, that they're trying to use to pressure people into fights, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling. And I was glad that I resisted the urge to get into, wow, maybe it's going to happen. I said, no. I've maintained that I do not believe Jones is ever going to fight again, certainly not at heavyweight. I'm going to stick with my guns. I'm still saying, once again, it ain't happening.
My experience, weightlifting causes a mix of confidence and lack of confidence. I think that's what's probably happening with Jones.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know what I'm talking about.
It makes me unconfident when the barbell crushes my neck and stuff like that. My puny little bird arms. Like, oh.
Yeah, I think. I would be shocked if they go for if Cejudo, fine. They might go for Cejudo, but if they go for anyone else in that division over O'Malley, I would be shocked. I mean, you can actually honestly say that he's got it on, that he's earned it on merit at this point.
He's looked atrocious in all of his other tests, and this seems to be the toughest one imaginable. And he looked
you're going to throw him another one, just would be stupid.
Yeah, put him in some ranked fights for sure. And I think there's every possibility that O'Malley, does just look like ass again against another guy who just takes.
There's a big possibility. He's marketable. He's beaten the
He's number
absolute,
one in the division.
Solid number one contender. And
I'd also add not just the number one contender, the guy many people thought won the second Alja fight, but no, he didn't. But
many people thought that.
I promised myself I wouldn't talk about scoring, but here I am lying.
Yeah.
But still, even then, like the guy where a lot of people were like, "This is the most skilled fighter in the division," even if because that's something I would be happy to to say that like he's probably all round a more. I would pick him to beat Aljamain Sterling. They fought 10 times. I would definitely pick Petr Yan to win most of them.
Yeah. I think he could beat O'Malley. Certainly that fight was close enough. They could easily rematch, which they might also try to do that. And I don't think it would be crazy to pick Yan to just come up with a few key adjustments and win this time. But yeah. It's a huge
I think if anything I had to say about this fight, just overarching, ignoring the whole scoring thing, because that's its own issue, and it's not one I think that's worth going into today. I think O'Malley, there's a lot of reasons to be very interested in where things goes, because hopefully he improves as a fighter, because that's the kind of things we like to see. As for Yan, ideally, maybe he goes back to the drawing board, tries to show up those few things, but either way, he still showed that he was every bit as that good of a fighter, nonetheless. A lot of people still thinks he won. And these guys' careers aren't over, and so even if the guy you thought didn't deserve to win won, neither guy's career is over yet, and there's still a lot more to go. So,
yeah, and
that's coming from a guy whose two favorite fighters are Yan and Oliveira. So, I think that's okay.
the wisdom of a heartbroken man, right there.
Oh, damn. They figured out I'm in the medical field. That's great.
So,
you have to say a bit about the scoring, right? Which is
a little bit.
People have been insane.
Yeah.
Cut it out, guys.
Yeah. I mean, I'm used to it now. And it's not even as delicious as it used to be. Because, of course, Yan has some of the most annoying hardcore fans. But it is. I did say on Twitter the other day, if you're new to MMA Twitter, what you should know is that every time a certain fighter named Petr Yan loses, half your feed will enter a goth phase, because it is shocking every time it happens. That I love all those fight site guys, I really do, but they are like, everything sucks. What's the point of anything? Bantamweight isn't even a good division anymore. Like, pump the brakes, fellas. You know,
I never said this. I don't deserve to be lumped.
Not you, but all those other assholes.
Oh, you're going to have to be their avatar for now. So we're just going to have to. I didn't tell you about this. You're going to spend the last 10 minutes of this call just being.
I have to become full complaining now. I mean, I have a lot of things to complain about that I could complain about, but personally, I am very happy about this scoring argument for one simple reason: it's better than the last fight that triggered this scoring argument.
Which was that?
It was Vieira Holm. Which
oh God!
Still confuses the. Which is like, of all fights you choose to bring back the scoring debate on, you choose that one?
Yeah, well, that's the story. It's either like a fight where you absolutely don't even give a shit about who won. The fight was terrible. Nobody looked good. Or you feel that it's like robbing people of the chance to discuss a really great fight, which this was. I mean, O'Malley-Yan
was a good fight.
Was a fantastic fight. Super competitive
also,
and exciting.
It compelled me to defend fucking Sugar Sean O'Malley.
Yeah. You know it was interesting.
The fact that people were like, got destroyed. This is the worst. I was like, I want to sound like a Sugar Sean fan. I still hate the guy.
Yeah.
Like, just fought a good fight, and like after the first round, I was like, oh shit, that was really close. You'd better win the next 2 rounds, Peter Yan, because I don't know who won that. I think you did, but yeah. And I ended up rewatching it, and I was like, I still don't know who won that first round.
Yeah, that's all I've been saying about it, too. I think there are 2 fairly clear rounds. People have even disputed that and said that they thought Petr Yan won the third.
Lots of people thought he won all 3 rounds, which is, I think, disqualification for...
And there is a thing where
rounds of bias.
Petr Yan has the only really clear round in the fight, I guess. The thing is even in that...
He still got dropped pretty bad in it, but yes.
Even in the round he got, it's just because he like hurt O'Malley worse than O'Malley hurt him, but they were both badly hurt. But yeah, it's just like if you agree that he won the second and O'Malley won the third, you know, got a lot more strikes out there. He landed 2 goddamn partially blocked but still visibly powerful head kicks, a lot of clean jabs, busted Petr Yan's face open with a knee. You know, a lot of big memorable moments. Then how are you looking at that first round and not saying, that was close? You can't be that confident about who won the first round, right? Not that confident. It was close. If you're sitting on the wrong side of the cage, even if you thought Petr Yan won it, every reason to be like, oh, yeah, you know, maybe Sean O'Malley got the better of some of those exchanges from my particular angle, which is how the judges score these fights. It was within the margins of, you know, 2 out of the 3 judges might see that opposite to the way I did.
Yeah. It's worth, like...
I don't consider it a robbery. I consider it a questionable decision, maybe, but even there, it was very,
I don't even
very...
consider it, like, questionable.
It was very close.
It's just one of those rounds where I just look at that first round, I'm just like, I don't care who won this.
Yeah.
I just don't care. Like, it's super close. Like, it's a few fairly clean face punches from O'Malley, a few clean low kicks from Yan, a few glancing low kicks from O'Malley, and then it's a takedown into not much. Like,
yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
It's like, the only thing I can say is that, like, no fighter or trainer or anyone watching that fight, anyone watching a fight like that, should ever bank on their guy having won a round like that,
right.
No matter what side you're on.
Yeah. Yeah, and back to, you know, that. I mean, that's how I felt watching it. I watched these fights after they aired live. A couple people, you know, tried to non-spoilery spoil me. They're like, "Oh, you just watched the main card opener. You're in for a ride, and not the good kind. You're going to be very depressed." And the Dillashaw Aljo thing was depressing. This I didn't find depressing at all. I mean, I was actually shocked when I finished watching and finally looked at notifications and stuff, and realized that everyone was outraged by this scorecard. And just back to Dan's original point, like, this fight was too good to really be fussing about that too much, in my opinion. I think it was well within the margins of being close enough. You can understand why it went O'Malley's way. You should be able to. And otherwise, I mean, right from the beginning, like, it was just a fucking great fight. Mm-hmm. So, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, it was also, I think that like led to it is that it was was a miserable card for a lot of people. I mean,
Yeah.
like the card as a whole sucked.
Yeah.
Later fights were interesting, but there's like it was. I mean, it was just a bad card running up to the main card. By and large, like
except for that light heavyweight fight.
yeah,
that was awesome.
I mean, even that.
No, that was awesome. You shut your mouth.
It was awesome for one round. The next two were dog shit.
I disagree. I loved it.
It was a pretty bad card.
Yeah.
And in a lot of like dispiriting ways, like for a lot of people, a lot of fan favorites, Charles, and then like TJ, the TJ thing was genuinely dispiriting. And for a lot of people, I think there was only one look how depressed they were. There was only one thing that they could be mad about.
Yeah.
They'd be like, where they can just complain about it in a sporty way. It was Piotr Jan and Sean O'Malley.
Yeah, Piotr Jan got robbed at gunpoint in an alley. Yeah.
Ugh.
Okay, well, I think that's I think that's all the time we have with Dan. Dan Albert, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. It's been a real pleasure. You guys.
That's been great.
Yeah, I really appreciated coming on. This was really fun.
We will have you back, my friend. Can you tell the people listening where they can find you and your writing?
Yeah, so I have a very pretentious Twitter account called @typewritingda, whereupon if I'm not complaining about whatever it is that's wrong or making really dumb inside jokes just for me that nobody understands.
And people might think the DA is your initials, but actually it refers to the fact that you are a huge J.K. Rowling fan.
Oh,
You're a
God,
lifelong member of Dumbledore's
I don't
army.
need people to know I was an English major surrounded by people like that. It's actually the most traumatizing effing thing.
That's actually the real reason we brought you on today, Dan. We wanted to plead with you to please read another goddamn book.
That is genuinely something I said to some of my peers. That's so funny. And you can find most of my work on the fight site. I've written about MMA, mostly historical boxing, which always takes a while. I'm trying to get a Muay Thai article in, but that's kind of been a challenge. But for anyone listening to this who already follows me, appreciate it. The support means a lot. And Honor and Phil, thanks for having me on board. This was super fun.
Yeah, really happy to have you. And I will tell people in particular, I really enjoyed your recent piece on Alexander Volkanovski. I think people will find that. I believe it's right at the top of your Twitter feed. So if people find @typewritingda on Twitter, you can read one of Dan's many great articles there.
Thanks. That Volkanovski isn't the most recent one, though. I wrote something on Yoel Romero where I have proven to be the only one to ever explain Adesanya Romero, which is the most embarrassing thing I've ever done.
Awesome.
That's when you know that the sport has you, when you find yourself like really getting into some sick thing that no one else wants to really like dig into in any great detail.
Yeah. Anyways, thanks guys. This was super fun. I gotta get back to work.
All right, thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, and we will be back right after this break. What's the plan, Phil? Are we going to talk about the rest of 280, or are we going to devote segment 3 to Cater Allen?
Let's talk. We can probably spread it. I think we can. How much more do we want to talk about?
280? We've already spent over an hour, so I think we got to pick one or the other, and then the other one has to be a bonus episode. This is good, by the way, to have this discussion on air. This is people can get to see how the sausage is made. Okay, well, let's
with a great deal of umming and ahhing.
Let's take the goddamn break, and it's a surprise which of those fights we're discussing after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Another big thank you to Dan Albert. What a nice guy. You know, it's about time they got one working at that fight site place.
Yeah, I think they have basically one space there, and they just like cycle them in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Once one guy leaves, they get just advertised for the nice guy.
Yeah, we got opening for a normal person.
Hmm. Oh, I'm a giant dickhead. Do you have any spaces for them? It's like, no. We are full.
So, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Another thank you to Dan, who we will definitely be having back. We got to have guest analysts on more often. I mean, we go through like spells where we have like a guest every other week, and then we do like 6 months in a row where nobody, but it's just us making each other insane in our isolation. But that was fun, and Dan's a very insightful guy and a good analyst. So thanks again to him for joining us. And now let's talk about the rest of UFC 280. By which I mean most of the rest of the main card, because there's precious little else to talk about elsewhere on this whole schedule. The co-main event, Phil. Aljamain Sterling, TJ Dillashaw. What is there to say about this? I mean, it was not a fight.
No. Yeah, I mean, this was just super grim to watch, and also like one of those things where I found myself, you just find yourself instinctively thinking about the backroom politics of it all,
yeah,
and why, for example, everyone seemed to know about the Shaw's horrific pre-existing injury, and like why there was a replacement ready for the main event and not for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, just bad. And it also made me think, and TJ Dillashaw, I mean, I guess maybe Petr Yan's going for that prize now. He really is one of those guys where I feel like I've confidently picked him a bunch of times and been proven wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, of course he's going to beat Dominic Cruz. Why would he not beat Dominic Cruz? He's just, he hits harder and he can keep an even higher pace and low kick and stuff. I was like, of course he's going to beat Henry Cejudo.
Yeah.
Just much better than him. And yeah, this was another one where we picked it with some confidence and then some TJ Dillashaw stuff happened.
Yeah, now, I mean, more than usual, I don't think. There's not really a good reason to look at this and completely change your perception of the style matchup.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the things about it that made it so dispiriting, is that the minute you saw Dillashaw's face contorting in agony, you're just like, oh, fuck this.
Yep. Yeah, literally the first takedown. I mean, to Aljamain Sterling's credit, maybe that injury could have taken longer to reveal itself. Sterling did what we kind of expected. He came out immediately looking to just start swamping Dillashaw on the ground and testing his grappling defense as early as he possibly could. He caught the very first kick that Dillashaw threw, just ran him hyper aggressively towards the fence, just trying to bowl him over, just to create a scramble. And that was it. Dillashaw posted as he went down, and his shoulder dislocated, which apparently has been dislocating constantly since April.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all the credit you can give Sterling. I mean, because otherwise it wasn't a fight. The rest of the time was just TJ Dillashaw having one arm, and I guess impressively surviving. But I'm not gonna give the UFC what they want and compliment TJ Dillashaw for his toughness when it was literally the only thing he had any opportunity to display. Why did this fight happen is the question. We're not qualified to answer that. We don't know, but that's the question people should continue asking. Why was he medically cleared for this fight when this injury had been going on for so long? And what is even the interest of making a fight like this happen? What's TJ Dillashaw's interest in this? Is he just that dumb that
he might be super broke.
He could be broke. Yeah, I guess that's distinctly possible. He might also just be a moron where
in the cage like this. I'm never going to be able to get in the cage back like this again. I'm going to get 6-figure payday, whatever it could be, out of this.
Yeah.
And then, you're a fighter. You convince yourself that maybe you're going to find the one tiny path to victory.
Right.
Just, kick him in the head instantly.
If he's not broke or even close to being broke, then I would say he's a dumbass for taking this fight. Because clearly there was some element of, like, manipulation happening here. Where, like, somebody knew he was having these issues. Somebody stacked the deck to make sure he could make it to the fight. Dillashaw, of all people, should be like, what am I actually getting out of this? Because obviously it's a terrible idea to take this fight with an injury that is going to present itself less than 30 seconds into the first round and completely take me out of the contest. I don't know.
So, thank you to everyone on TJ's team and all the officials who let him put it back in and then go back out again for the second round.
And have it instantaneously dislocate.
What the fuck was the point of this?
Yeah, exactly.
Was one of the most, like...
Why was no one looking out for TJ?
Things I've seen in recent memory.
Yeah, why was no one looking out for TJ Dillashaw? What the fuck? What was going on? Whose interest did this serve?
Bellator stopped Aaron Pico from going out when his shoulder...
Yeah.
Out. I mean, admittedly, his team tried to pop it back in, and, TJ's team did pop it back in because they presumably had lots of experience by that point. But still... What the fuck? They should have just called the fight.
Yeah. Like, oh, we were...
like, oh, well, you tried your one insane, stupid idea. It instantly didn't work.
Yeah.
Fight's over, bye.
Yeah, because even in the second round, after they popped it back in, he was still fighting one-handed.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't even have any confidence in throwing his left hand because it was going to fly out of the goddamn socket the moment he did, and he knew that.
He didn't have any confidence in anything. He couldn't keep his balance. He couldn't, you know...
And why should he?
You?
There's no reason for him
to be doing is thinking, my arm's going to fall off any second.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think a dozen people dropped the ball to a, frankly, criminal degree. And I just am left asking, like, who does this serve? Some people were like, oh, they wanted to make Aljo's reign seem more legitimate. That's why they kept this fight on the table. They knew he was going to win. And it's like, does the UFC like Aljamain Sterling? What do they care if his reign seems? That seems a bit fantastical to me. I don't know, but what was the idea? You couldn't come up with a replacement fight? You couldn't? Corey Sandhagen wouldn't have been willing to take a fight? I don't understand. Petr Yan wouldn't have been willing to take that fight? You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? Why wasn't there another matchup made if you knew for 5 months that this was an issue? Yeah. Criminal negligence. I mean, really, frankly, like, somebody should be heavily penalized for this. Somebody who's not TJ Dillashaw, because he has already paid the price that nobody should have asked him to pay. And, obviously,
in the long term, everyone who knew about it. In the sort of medium term, the fact that he apparently told, like, the ref and other people about this.
Yeah.
And in the short term, everyone who allowed him to keep fighting.
Yeah.
After the first round. Fuck them all.
And it's especially notable, that, like, the referee, like Mark Goddard, well known for being a hard ass, but he's essentially on the UFC's payroll here. There's no commission in Abu Dhabi. They brought their own refs. They ran their own show. So even Mark Goddard should feel disgraced by this, that he allowed this to go on, that he under whatever pressure, did not treat this the way that you should treat a fair fight. Yeah, just a real shit show, honestly. And if the idea was to lend more legitimacy to Aljamain Sterling's reign, swing and a miss. Because now all we can talk about is how you could barely have room to mention that, I guess Aljo looked fine. He looked great. But, like, what are we measuring against? Literally nothing.
Yeah, I mean, he looked great, and he got to waste, the championship level, you only get so many fights because the camps are so hard.
Yeah.
And he's not a young fighter, as we mentioned. He's, like, pretty much he's the same age as, like, Beneil Dariush.
Yeah. I'm actually willing to believe that even Aljo is somehow an unwitting victim here, because it didn't appear that he knew.
Huh.
His corner was screaming at him.
He said afterwards he didn't even know which arm it was or that it had happened until they told him.
Yeah, his corner was, they noticed, so they didn't appear to know either because they noticed it was an issue very near the end of the first round. And Aldo didn't even hear them and didn't attack it until the second round. He came out aware of the injury.
I mean, so we won't have many fights to see like a prime Aljamain Sterling
Right.
beaten, and this is going to be one of them. And it's against a complete pointless, utterly pointless layup because the guy he was fighting was a cripple.
Yeah. I don't know. You know, I'd rather them do Dana White Power, the White Power slapping league. You know, let Dillashaw use the one arm he has and just have the bantamweight title defended with a slap contest. That would have been more fair.
Would have rather Sean O'Malley got the shot than this.
Frankly,
would have rather
or Cheeto.
Rather Cheeto Vera.
Yeah.
Let alone Sean O'Malley. Cheeto Vera. I'm kidding.
I know you hate Cheeto now, but come on, I don't
hate Cheeto more than I hate Sean O'Malley.
Given the circumstances, yeah, why not anyone else? It's bantamweight. You have contenders.
He got the title shot off a robbery. At least a pretty questionable decision win.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Why was it so important to make sure TJ Dillashaw was in this fight? We can't answer that question, but
it's not even like the contractually obligated thing where they have to make sure that there's a title shot in the pay-per-view, because obviously there already was one.
Yeah. I have no idea. It's a mystery. We can't answer the questions, but we should continue asking them because something genuinely criminal went on here that should not have been allowed to happen. Okay, that's enough. I mean, yeah, I wish we could praise Aljamain Sterling more, but he looked great given a blank slate. That's not what we watch championship title defenses to find out. They should have thrown a fucking grappling dummy in there with him and just let him do an exhibition. So what was the other one? Oh yeah, Beneil Dariush.
A sort of unqualified bright spot in the card.
Yeah, honestly. I mean, I will say, over the course of our discussion, we were starting to realize this might actually be more of a coin flip than we thought. Wait a minute. Beneil Dariush has literally only ever lost by getting caught and finished, and usually that happens in the midst of him fighting a really strategically sound, solid fight that he's winning. And that in his recent fights where he's gone insane and we've been worried about him gassing, there's been serious provocation for that to happen. Whereas in the ones where he can just sort of defensively grapple with somebody and maintain a slow pace, he has done it. He's still capable of being this classy veteran fighter that he has, and probably been for 20 UFC fights now. He's always had the ability to just, maintain a good steady pace and mind his appropriate distance and win carefully. And I gotta say, by the time I talked to Zane on the Vivisection, I was really honestly wishing I hadn't picked Gamrot already. Because I had continued to think about it, and I was like, I think Dariush might win this fight.
Yeah, he just doesn't lose decisions like this.
Right. Yeah. It was just frankly, just a call that a prediction that failed to take into account who both the fighters were. And lo and behold, was there a competitive first round when Gamrot was at his freshest? Yes. I think Dariush still won it. And then he just went on to utterly shut Gamrot out of the wrestling and grappling game. Amazing takedown defense, amazing scrambling and positional awareness. And then just made him go first on the feet. Just kept his distance. Was like, okay, you're going to commit. I'm going to wait for you to step in, and I'm going to nail you. And then reset. And there were jabs. There were beautiful step-in knees. There were uppercuts. There were a lot of things tailored to make Gamrot think twice about changing levels. And then there were also just some really well-timed counter left hands. One in particular was maybe the loudest punch I've heard all year, where he hit Gamrot mid-kick, and it was like a goddamn thunderclap.
I'm shocked that it didn't even appear to hurt Gamrot that bad, apart from knocking him flat like he'd just been hit by a shotgun.
He went down in a heap, and then he was instantly back up. Somehow he shook it off, showing what a great fighter he is and how tough he is. But Beneil Dariush, frankly, cruised to victory in this fight. He looked phenomenal.
Yeah, it is almost, as other people have said, it's almost everything you would want to see from him to say, I can fight Islam Makhachev.
Yeah, exactly.
I can simply fight him at range, and I will punish every entry, and I will have rock-solid takedown defense. And, yeah, pretty much, almost. But I think one exception, which is that I think Gamrot himself recognized this, but the open stance matchup, I think, did not work well for Gamrot because he really just compelled him to lean into the classic level change of like big right hand or level change takedown, and he was just, as you said, he was just struggling to buy an entry. He was just struggling to close the distance that the open stance was giving him. So Dariush was just picking him off with knees, body kicks, left hands, like everything as he was closing that gap.
Yeah.
And his own entries were just, they were just predictable. It was just right hand or takedown from too far outside. He couldn't build his way into his shots at all. Yeah,
especially when your opponent is being very patient and keying in on the distance more than anything else. Dariush was just ready to meet him, and at that point, if you're being made to hit either one of these two basic entries from the wrong distance, then you can get countered by, the same shots are going to work whether it's the takedown or whether it's the single leg shot or the right hand. Distance was the cue for Dariush here, and he managed it pretty flawlessly, honestly.
Gamrot, I think, tried fighting from southpaw quite a lot.
Yes.
And he's not very good at it. I think that's the major difference, I would say, from like a stylistic perspective. You're looking at like Dariush as a rock solid, defending takedowns like that from far away and just intercepting things, is that it would look very different against Makhachev, because Makhachev will be obviously also a southpaw, and they'll be standing in close stance the whole time. And I think Makhachev has shown himself to be quite good at fighting fellow southpaws, if I recall correctly. I just think it will look like and conversely, I'm not sure if I remember Dariush looking that great against other southpaws. It's close. I think Close is a southpaw, right? But Dunham definitely is.
Close is mostly right-handed, but he switches. He switches a lot.
Oh yeah.
Dunham is. Yeah, but he certainly, some of it is just that Gamrot he's not particularly sophisticated as an orthodox fighter. He's even less so as a southpaw. But, certainly Dariush is not incapable of landing, the Adriano Martins counter left hand. There's a southpaw that Makhachev got deaded by. And certainly some of those openings are absolutely still there. As we said in the breakdown of the main event, there were a couple occasions.
It is, as I said, it's almost exactly what you want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and there were occasions where Makhachev going forward was really overextending himself, and exactly the kind of bad positions that Martins was able to counter. And Dariush is a hitter, man. That's also something I think we failed to take proper stock of. Dariush is just a very powerful puncher.
Just in general, I think we've just always been. I've said this before, but I think I just need to lean into it more. The idea that Dariush is not even that he's a bad athlete. I think got to put it to bed. He's quite a good athlete. He looks awful. He doesn't look like an athlete at all. But he's
he's
all
got
the
no
scrambles,
ass.
the pace, the power. He is very physically strong. He is quite a good athlete.
He looked stronger than ever too in this fight. I'm not used to seeing Dariush look that shredded.
A brick wall for most of those takedowns.
Yeah, and he really his back, his upper body, his legs. He looks like he has been working on his strength and conditioning as well. So I would still say, is he like incredibly fast or agile? Doesn't have that kind of athleticism, but he's powerful and strong, no doubt. And otherwise is technical in the right areas, or just savvy in the right areas. That, again, if there's like a simple sort of, I guess, node, to use Greg Jackson's annoying term, if there's like a simple node where he can just cut off all of your entries, like a fight like this, then yeah, it's like, what is your path to beating him? Because he's just punishing you every time you try to make any of the things you can do happen. He's stopped you at the pass, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that basically people have slightly underplayed how physically imposing he is, and also like just how old he is. As we were saying before, he's not that old.
Yeah, he's got the silver fox.
The same age as like most of the prime fighters on this card.
Yeah, this is Dariush's prime, I think. I mean, maybe the tail end of it now. He's 33, but we're looking at a guy who's had tons of experience at the highest levels, and he's on an 8-fight win streak, 9-fight win streak now. It's unbelievable. And as much as some of those wins are like insane and violent and memorable for that fact, there are just as many just solid, comprehensive victories in there. Obviously, the fight with Tony Ferguson, but I think people forget the extent to which he kind of just, much like he did here, he had a tough, competitive first round with Carlos Ferreira, and then he just whooped his ass. He just out-grappled him and beat him soundly in the remaining 2 rounds. And that is exactly what happened here, except it was a more defensive approach where he was winning as long as he was just not allowing Gamrot a single takedown, which I don't think he did after the first round.
Yeah. Just in general, like, really underplayed as just a very coherent fighter with like very few like replicable ways of beating him.
Yeah. I'm very curious to see him versus Islam. I mean, I'd be really happy if they made that matchup. I don't think it's a particularly easy one to call. I think we've seen enough of these matchups where, you know, these like momentum-building grapplers just can't build any momentum against Beneil Dariush. They even feel like they've started off, and then he shuts them back out. He learns their entries. And, Islam more diverse. We're going to be looking at clinch takedowns as well as shots, and we're going to be looking at whatever he and his team determine are the best takedowns to try against Dariush. But I think there's still a reasonable chance he's going to have to spend a lot of time with Dariush on the feet, and Dariush is just more comfortable there, more powerful, and he's always going to be super dangerous on the counter. So I think it's a great matchup, and time to stop underrating.
I mean, I'm still going to comfortably pick Islam, I think, if that fight happens.
I probably will as well.
Like,
but
he's just wiping out very good fighters at the moment.
Yeah.
In like, I mean, Khabib himself said it. Like, this is pound for pound candidate type performances.
No doubt.
He's just crushing people. But it is also worth pointing out that the question mark is still there that we thought most was there before the Oliveira fight. Islam has still never been in a fight with like major pushback.
Right.
Again, as you said very accurately in that breakdown, he deserves credit for that because it means that he's mostly thrashing the people that he fights. But it also just means that you don't know what happens when he gets dragged deep into a fight where he's getting stunned.
Yeah. And if it's an opponent who can construct a sort of wall into like the fail-safe phases of the fight, if that is at all possible, that's a wide variety of styles might be able to beat Islam just by keeping him uncomfortable on the feet. Who knows? So, yeah, it's time to stop underrating long-back Benny. We're seeing a great fighter in his prime. There's no question of that. And that's it, I think, for this week's edition of Heavy Hands. I want to thank Dan Albert once again for joining us, helping us break down the 2 most interesting fights on this card. And, find us on Twitter, at Evil Greg Jackson. That's Phil. At Boxing Bush. That's me. Check out our Patreon. We're going to have a little Calvin Kattar, Arnold Allen analysis up there. We will probably also touch on Tim Means versus Max Griffin, which is the only other fight on the card. Just period. It's a pretty.
There are some silly things on there.
Yes, there are.
There aren't many ones where you're like, oh, this could be cool.
Yeah, and there are a lot of fights that look like they might just be absolutely dreadful. So a very top-heavy card, but we will definitely have fun breaking down those top 2 fights. Patreon.com/heavyhands. It's $3 a month. Yada, yada, yada. You've heard it all before. Until next week, when we will be back to discuss Cater Allen. We'll probably squeeze in a segment about Jake Paul Anderson Silva, by the way. That's happening this weekend, right?
Oh, shit.
So maybe we'll try to preview that in our bonus episode as well. And then perhaps squeeze it onto the main show next week. Until then, though, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.